Today we're going to be talking about DDM maintenance, um, ways we can keep our data and users up to date and optimize our server usage. So the first thing to talk about before we start making any changes to the database is backing up your data. So obviously in the event of a hardware failure or user error, when making changes to the database, we need a point where we can practically restore. And obviously any maintenance is probably ideally done just after creating that backup. And we do have a sample backup script that comes in the server install, but it is a basic backup. Essentially, when you're backing up the database, there's a minimum requirement for restoring. So we need to have a copy of the file vault, a copy of the file mappings, and a copy of the database, and that allows us to restore that data. Obviously, you'll probably have your own IT policies. You can use virtual machines and snapshots to create backups, but as long as you've got those minimum requirements, any IT policy is likely to cover that. After we've created our backups, next we're going to look at how we can keep all of our data up to date. And you might see symptoms of outdated data from your users. So sometimes when they're saving data where they've made no changes to parts, they might get prompts saying that parts require saving. And that can occur for a couple of reasons. It can occur because the original file was created in an older version of the CAD software, so Solid Edge 2018, for example, and when they've loaded it into Solid Edge 2025. So although the user's not actually made any change to the file themselves, just the act of loading it into the new environment has updated that file type. So you can get a prompt from that. And the other reason it can happen is because you've modified a mapped parameter in the DDM Office environment, and that parameter needs to be updated in the CAD environment. So again, as soon as that item's loaded, that parameter is updated. So the user's not actually changed anything, but the file has been updated itself. So you'll be prompted to save them. So we'll look at ways we can keep that data up to date. So the first thing we'll look at is the version updater, and that can be found in the admin tool under CAD and neutral files, and then CAD settings. And then we have version updaters for SolidWorks, Solid Edge, IronCAD, and Inventor. So not all CAD environments are necessarily concerned about the version of the file. Now I'm using the latest development build at the moment, so I have all of these can be launched directly from the admin tool, but if you're on a different version, you might find those in the file system for DDM. And we will look at Solid Edge as an example. And so if I launch the version updater, the first thing we can see is what file versions I've got operating. If I turn off the latest issue at the top there, we can see a bit more. So we can see I've got 3 parts, 1 assembly, and 3 drawings that are all from 2023. So each time I load these items, I will be prompted to save them. And I don't always necessarily have the ability to do that if they're released or older versions. So this tool allows us to update those files automatically. Over on the right, we have our options available. So the first thing I unchecked was latest issue. So what this allows us to do is configure exactly what we're updating. So you might want to only update your latest issue. You don't want to update the entire database because you're not using the older issues. We can specify the order in which these are processed. So processed from the newest to the oldest because those are the files you're using most often. Or perhaps you want to process from the oldest forwards because you've got lots of standard parts that you use over and over. You can also specify whether we want to process drawings, parts, and assemblies, and any combination of those. So again, that's particularly useful if you've got a large database. You don't want to run all of it all at once. You can fine-tune how long you're going to run this for. And we've got further tools to restrict which files are processed. So we can restrict by number. We can restrict by source version, so that refers to the CAD version. So I could say I only want to process the items from 2023 because I'm on 2025. We can also specify the date range, and we've got a few options in here, so I can process everything that was produced in the last week. So if you're running this tool regularly, you might want to just open it up once a week, once a month, once a year, or we can specify specific date ranges. So if you're starting to use this tool for the first time, you might want to specify a set period to run this over and then work your way backwards. Then we have specific run details. So that's how long the update runs for. So if I were to select the update all option, all of the settings I've got here, it will continue to run this until all of those files are updated. I can specify to run it for a set period of time. So if I know that the server isn't used in out of office hours, I could set it to run for a set period of time so it doesn't affect any users. Or I can specify that it only runs for a set number of records. And then we have the restart CAD time. The reason for that is obviously opening items and closing them. It uses the memory, so this just allows the CAD environment to clear that working memory every so often and keeps the tool running. So yeah, next we will look at the action client. So this is to do with maintaining parameters. So the action client, we've got an individual server for each CAD environment. So as an example, I will pick on IronCAD this time. And we've got a couple of options at the top here, which are to do with parameter refresh. Now, as I said before, that can occur when a user has modified an attribute in the DDM office environment that is mapped into the CAD environment. Now, we could go through and check those manually, but in this tool, if I check these two boxes and I select show quantity to process, I can see that I have 4 items that require a parameter refresh. There's 4 modifications have occurred, so these items need to be refreshed. Now, if these items are in a state of release and a user loads them, again, it's going to prompt them to save them, so we want to avoid that if we can. And this tool allows us to refresh those by checking these boxes and then running the client. This tool also allows us to create neutral files. So if you've recently imported data into your database and you want to add PDFs to your documents, your drawings, if you want to generate DXF files for all of your drawings or 3D neutral files, you can configure those in here as well. Now obviously, whilst it might be tempting to turn on all of these checkboxes, all of these files will take up disk space, so this should be used for files that you use essentially all the time. So we've got a tool for each environment. I'm picking on IronCAD specifically, and then we have the action client. Sometimes when you come into the action client, you'll be prompted to relaunch this as admin just to give it the ability to modify the files. And we can then select the CAD environment we want to run. And we've got a few more options here. So if I select 2025, that's the IronCAD environment I'm running, but you can specify which environment you want to update these in. We can also specify when this tool can actually run. So again, you'd probably want this to run outside of your sort of standard office hours. And what it will do is it will open each file, and as it loads it, those parameters will update, and then it will save it back to the database. And because this is an admin tool, it can do it regardless of the state limitations. And with that, obviously, every time it's doing this, it's creating new files, as Joe said before. So you need to be sure that you've got the disk space to do that. So yeah, with both of those tools, that should help you maintain all of your data. And I suppose another thing that is important to note is obviously the CAD version that I've selected to run this update. If it's an older file type, it will load into the new one. It will update the file version. So again, if you're running multiple CAD environments, it is something to be aware of. So next we're going to look at purging some of these files. So obviously if we've run the version updater and the action client, we are going to be generating new file versions. So if we head over to states and we look at parts and documents, I can right click on my released item and I can select purge file versions by state. Now I'm going to start with released here, but it's perhaps isn't the order I would normally do it in the real world, but just to explain the tool. So what this allows us to do is we can specify how many file versions are retained. In fact, let's jump back a step just to make sure it makes sense. If I look at my recent items here, so file versions is obviously different to issues. Every time a user saves an item, it creates a new version on that entry in the database. I've got no recent items on this one. Bear with me. So if I look at this part here, although this is issue 4, if I look in versions, I've only got 2 versions available. So version and issue are slightly different. Every time a user saves this part, it will add a new version, so that allows you to roll back and forth between these. Now obviously when an item gets to released, we don't need to modify it anymore, so it should be checked and approved. We shouldn't need to roll back and forth from that point. So what I can do here is I can specify how many of those are retained at each state. So looking at released, you might want to set this to just a single file version, or 2 or 3 depending on what your requirement is. But obviously if I've run the file version updater and the action client, I've generated new files because of that. So I can use this tool to clear out the older files that I no longer need. So I could set this to, and I can specify whether I want to purge drawings, documents and parts, and it will tell me how many I've got at this state. If we look at the purge summary, I haven't got anything to purge in this state, unfortunately. If I change it, can I go back? If I change this down to 1, so we can see now what I can purge if I were to reduce it down to 1, and we can get an indication of how much data we're going to save. And obviously this is a sample database, so it's not going to save you a huge amount of data in this case, but if you've got a very large replicated system, for example, there could be significant savings to be made there. Now, as I said before, I wouldn't necessarily start with released on an actual server. What I would do is I would start from obsolete and work my way backwards, because obsolete items I'm not likely to use, so any judgment is less of a risk, and then I'd work my way back to released, but I wouldn't go beyond release because checked and work in progress users are still working on. So after creating all those additional files, the purge file version allows you to bring that file count back down. Now, once you've set that, the other thing to consider is the automatic purge on arrival at a state. So if I edit this state here, at the bottom I have the option to set how many files are retained at this state. So it's important to set that at a sensible number to meet your needs in your database, so it's something worth reviewing if you find you have got a lot of items, a lot of file versions attached to a file after released. So that's the purging tool by state. Now another thing that can obviously take up space on your database is neutral files. So within DDM we do have the ability to generate neutral files on user save. Now again, this is an area where it might be tempting to tick a lot of boxes, so you've got all the file types you could possibly need at a moment's notice, but obviously that does generate more files that take up more space. So again, this is another area that's worth interrogating and just making sure you've got it set up to meet your needs and not excessive. So in this database for my IronCAD parts, I've got it to produce a PDF for every drawing, and I've currently got it set to produce a step file for parts and assemblies. Now, assemblies as a step file, perhaps not the most useful, so I should probably actually turn that off. But you can essentially configure those neutral files to have the ones you need readily available, whereas the other file types that you perhaps need less often should be generated manually through the DDM ribbon in the CAD environment itself, so they're produced as and when needed. So it's just another area to have a look at to optimize your disk space usage. And then the last section we're going to look at is disabling users. So obviously over a business's lifetime, users will come and go, and we don't want to fill up our database with unneeded users. So we do have the ability to disable them. We do want to keep the users in the database for audit trails. So every time a user's made a change, saved it, we want to keep that history. What we do want to do though is disable them so they can no longer be used as an active account. The other thing with disabling those accounts is what we don't want to do is leave data on their workbench. So under maintenance, we have access to workbenches, and if I select, so when I turned on show disabled users, I had a couple of users there which I can still see in this view, but I'll use the sample user for this example. So you can see this user's got some data on their workbench, and in here we have the ability to either remove items from their workbench, remove everything from their workbench, or send them to another user. So as a user leaves the organization, it makes sense to come into this tool to move all of that work either to a user to finish or just to remove from their workbench. Again, just an exercise of tidying up after a user's left. So that's everything on some basic DDM database management.